What if one of the world's most iconic Buddhist temples wasn't Buddhist at all? What if its towering stupas and intricate carvings were actually hiding a deeper, long-forgotten secret? A secret that could rewrite not only history, but also the spiritual identity of an entire region. This is the story of Kenji Nakamura, a renowned Japanese archaeologist, a skeptic of faith, and a man driven by science, who journeyed to Indonesia to explore Borobudur Temple, only to find himself on a path that would forever change his life. In the summer of 2025, the academic world buzzed with debate. Unusual weather, political turmoil, and the rapid advancement of AI had cast a surreal fog over global institutions. In the heart of Tokyo, Dr. Kenji Nakamura was busy preparing for yet another field expedition. Known across Asia for his empirical rigor and refusal to entertain anything outside verifiable fact, Kenji had built a career unearthing truths buried beneath centuries of myth and folklore. But this time, his destination was unlike any other. The Borobudur Temple, Indonesia's most famous ancient monument, was widely accepted as the largest Buddhist temple in the world. Dating back to the 9th century, it was considered a jewel of Mahayana Buddhist architecture. Pilgrims and tourists alike journeyed to marvel at its 9 stacked platforms and 2,672 relief panels. Yet a mysterious Dutch paper from 1908 had caught Kenji's attention. It hinted at inconsistencies within the temple's iconography and structural layout, clues that the site may not have originally been Buddhist. Was it possible that history had misread the clues? Intrigued by this anomaly, Kenji began to dig deeper. The paper, yellowed with age and written in a mix of archaic Dutch and Latin, described a series of unusual reliefs, panels that deviated from traditional Buddhist storytelling. Some seemed incomplete, while others portrayed geometrical patterns with no human figures at all. What struck Kenji most was a vague reference to a cube-shaped monument hidden beneath layers of stone, eerily reminiscent of the Kaaba in Mecca. Could this be a coincidence, or had the temple's original purpose been something else entirely, something lost in the retelling of history? These questions gnawed at Kenji's typically rational mind, compelling him to put aside his skepticism, pack his tools, and book a flight to Central Java. As he boarded the plane, he felt a strange weight settle over him, not anxiety, but anticipation. For the first time in his career, Kenji wasn't chasing facts. He was chasing something deeper, a truth that had eluded scholars for centuries. Kenji arrived in Yogyakarta under a veil of golden twilight. The airport's glass facade reflected a warm glow, and the scent of clove cigarettes and damp earth wafted through the air. As his cab rolled northward toward Magelang, he studied the hills silhouetted by dusk. In his hotel room, Kenji spread out his plans. He'd brought along infrared scanners, 3D mapping drones, and subsurface resonance imaging tools. His permits from Indonesia's Ministry of Culture allowed limited scanning, provided he reported all findings. The next morning, he stood before Borobudur. Towering in silent majesty, the temple radiated an aura that defied categorization. As he entered, he felt it, not awe, not fear, but a strange, wordless pull. Day by day, Kenji mapped the reliefs. He noticed omissions, no depictions of Siddhartha Gautama's birth, no scenes of his enlightenment. Instead, he found geometric motifs, 8-point stars, complex interlacing patterns, and cube-like structures. On the temple's western face, an eroded relief showed a group of robed men standing before a large, featureless cube. The carving had no Buddhist elements. Beneath the image, his scanner revealed what looked like Kufic script, early Arabic. His hands trembled as he processed the image. It couldn't be. Yet it was. Kenji stared at the screen, blinking in disbelief. The patterns were unmistakable, too defined to be accidental, too structured to be dismissed. Kufic script was one of the earliest forms of Arabic writing, typically found on early Islamic architecture and Quranic manuscripts. What was it doing beneath layers of volcanic stone in a supposedly Buddhist monument from the 9th century? He rechecked the calibration on his scanner, even ran a test on a neutral surface to confirm there was no error, but the result remained the same. The angular, austere lines of Kufic script lay beneath the stone like a secret waiting to be unearthed. Over the next several days, Kenji expanded his scans. He focused on the base layers, sections usually ignored by tourists and even many researchers. What emerged was a pattern that made him question everything. The reliefs formed a continuous sequence, one that didn't align with traditional Buddhist storytelling but rather hinted at a journey, a pilgrimage perhaps, anchored by a central cube and guided by stars. One night, in the dim light of his hotel room, he laid out the 3D scans beside early blueprints of Islamic structures from Mesopotamia. The parallels were unnerving. The orientation of Borobudur's inner chamber, its Qibla-like angle, was off from typical Buddhist alignment, but subtly pointed northwest, eerily close to the direction of Mecca from central Java. The geometric motifs, the absence of iconography, the abstract spiritual focus, they all hinted at an origin that defied mainstream academic consensus. Kenji had come to Borobudur seeking data, but what he found was a buried voice echoing from a forgotten past. The temple, it seemed, was not simply Buddhist, it was something else entirely, something hidden, something sacred. Kenji Nakamura couldn't sleep that night. He sat hunched over his laptop, eyes scanning back and forth between ancient relief images and scholarly databases on Islamic art. The hotel room buzzed with the soft whirring of his external hard drive as it processed gigabytes of scans. Every detail he examined brought more questions than answers. The ornate patterns he uncovered, interlocking octagons, tessellated stars, and vegetal arabesques, bore a haunting resemblance to the decorative language found in early Islamic architecture. They were elegant but minimal, symbolic yet abstract, drastically different from the narrative-driven imagery dominant in Buddhist art. He turned to the stone stupa diagrams. The central dome of Borobudur had always intrigued archaeologists due to its ambiguous function. Traditional interpretations claimed it represented the Buddhist concept of nirvana. But Kenji found something curious. Beneath the current structure was a buried foundation chamber. Scanning the base with ground-penetrating radar revealed a layout shockingly similar to the early masjid plan used in the Umayyad and Abbasid periods. A rectangular base, aligned subtly off-axis from due east, yet falling almost precisely in line with the Qibla direction pointing toward Mecca from Java. Over the following week, Kenji expanded his exploration. At night, he reviewed historical texts, including those rarely cited in modern discourse, Portuguese accounts from the 1500s, Chinese maritime records, and neglected Dutch archives from the colonial period. One obscure entry by a Dutch surveyor in 1908 mentioned carvings on lower terraces that had since been intentionally obscured. The report didn't elaborate, but it validated Kenji's suspicion. Someone had covered up Borobudur's true history. With renewed purpose, he returned to the temple, this time focusing on the lower, less accessible layers. Local guides watched with quiet reverence as he scanned beneath thick lichen and moss. On one occasion, while examining the northwestern corridor, his device detected unusual layering, reliefs hidden beneath others. Using a resonance imaging tool, he produced a digital reconstruction. What appeared was a depiction unlike anything recorded at Borobudur. A man standing beneath a crescent moon, surrounded not by deities but by inscriptions in what now clearly appeared to be Arabic. The relief was faint, but the inscription echoed a powerful message: La ilaha illallah. There is no God but Allah. Kenji dropped his scanner. He stared at the digital image blinking on his screen. It wasn't just a passing resemblance or artistic coincidence. It was a declaration. A statement of Tawhid, Islamic monotheism, etched into the stone centuries before Islam was ever officially recorded in Java, according to Western academic consensus. Kenji's world began to unravel. Every pillar of certainty he had relied on as a scientist began to wobble. He thought of his lectures on cultural diffusion, on religious syncretism, on the fixed timelines taught in universities. Could it all be wrong? Could it be that Borobudur was not a temple that evolved from Buddhism into Islamic influence, but rather an Islamic structure that had been retrofitted to appear Buddhist? He kept his findings secret for the moment, unsure of what such a revelation might trigger. Religious authorities would likely refute him. Government institutions could revoke his permits. He knew that he had stumbled upon something explosive, evidence that had the potential to rewrite not just Southeast Asian history, but global religious chronology. And as he sat on the temple steps one quiet morning, gazing westward into the golden mist, a strange peace filled him. Not pride, not fear, but humility. Because for the first time in his life, Kenji realized that the truth wasn't something to dissect or publish, it was something to surrender to. Kenji's findings stirred more than academic curiosity. He shared his scans with a small group of scholars from Cairo, Istanbul, and Fez. All of them, though cautious, noted clear parallels between Borobudur's patterns and early Islamic art, specifically from the Umayyad period, but the implications went beyond architecture. If Borobudur had once been an Islamic site, or at least influenced by Islam, then history had not merely overlooked this fact, it had deliberately erased it. Why? Who would rewrite history so profoundly? And what did it mean for Indonesia's spiritual heritage? Meanwhile, Kenji found himself spiritually torn. Raised in post-war Japan, he had never believed in God. But as he sat each evening on Borobudur's upper tiers, watching the sun set toward the Kaaba's direction, a strange peace filled him. He began to read the Quran, first out of academic interest, then from a place of quiet seeking. Its rhythm, symmetry, and mathematical depth fascinated him. One evening, he whispered a prayer, not to any god he knew, but to whatever force had brought him here. News of Kenji's discovery didn't stay confined to his encrypted academic circles for long. A leaked image, showing the eroded relief of the men before the cube and the faint Arabic inscription, found its way onto an Indonesian history forum, and from there, it spread like wildfire. The responses were polarizing. Some scholars dismissed it as pareidolia, a case of seeing what one wants to see, but others, especially those from regions with deep Islamic artistic legacies, took notice. Researchers from Cairo's Al-Azhar University, Turkey's Directorate of Religious Affairs, and Morocco's Islamic Art Institute independently confirmed similarities between Borobudur's geometric patterns and those found in early Islamic sites like the Dome of the Rock and the Umayyad Mosque in Damascus. It wasn't just art, it was a language of symbolism, of spiritual geometry, pointing to something larger, something hidden. And yet, what disturbed Kenji the most wasn't what was present, but what was missing. Why had no previous archaeologist seriously questioned the absence of core Buddhist iconography? Why had Dutch and British colonial records rarely elaborated on the site's inconsistencies? The deeper he looked, the more he sensed intentional silence. A historical redaction, done not out of ignorance, but design. Kenji began compiling evidence of what he called spiritual laundering, the deliberate reshaping of a site's identity to fit a colonial or ideological narrative. If Borobudur had Islamic roots, or even if it had once been a syncretic site that welcomed Islamic influence, then those who profited from the Buddhist narrative had much to lose. But while the academic debate flared, something more personal unfolded within Kenji. Nights spent beneath the stars atop the temple no longer felt like part of a job. They became rituals of reflection. The structure he once saw as stone and symmetry now pulsed with invisible meaning. The Quran, at first a source of academic fascination, began to feel like a mirror. Its verses echoed through him, not with foreignness but with eerie familiarity. He found in it the same balance, precision, and elegance he had devoted his life to studying in mathematics and archaeology. Concepts like Tawheed, the oneness of God, began to make intuitive sense to him, not as doctrine, but as a universal constant. Each sunset became an unspoken prayer. Each breeze that rustled through the stupas carried a quiet invocation. And then, one evening, as the horizon turned crimson and the call to prayer rose from a distant village loudspeaker, Kenji closed his eyes and whispered, not out of obligation, but from a place deep within, "Guide me, if you are real." It was the first prayer of his life, and though no thunder roared, no visions appeared, something shifted. A stillness descended, a clarity he had never known. The temple wasn't just an artifact anymore, it was a witness. As whispers of Kenji's findings reached Jakarta and the West, the backlash was swift. Indonesian heritage boards dismissed his claims as conspiracy. Buddhist authorities accused him of distorting sacred history. But the fiercest opposition came from political leaders who feared religious unrest. In press conferences, they labeled Kenji a provocateur, possibly an agent of foreign destabilization. Yet amidst this firestorm, Kenji found allies, not in governments but in hearts. Local villagers, curious imams, and even young monks came to him quietly asking, "Is it true?" He never claimed certainty, he only offered what he had found. Weeks later, in a small house on the edge of Magelang, Kenji stood before an elderly imam. Surrounded by silence, he recited the Shahada. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa Allah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. He had come to study stone, and found something eternal. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time, remember, truth doesn't fear questions, only lies do. And say, the truth has come, and falsehood has vanished.